Hello friends, thanks for tuning into this week's tech tip. One of the questions I get from clients and people all the time is how can I take better photos with my smartphone? So I'm going to give you 5 ways that you can improve the photos that you're taking with your smartphone. The first tip is that you need to make sure you have a fairly recent smartphone. I know that seems obvious, but there's a lot of people running around with iPhone 5s or iPhone 6s that are just little chiclet phones. And they don't understand. They've seen phones with 3 cameras on the back of them, but they don't really understand what's going on with that, or 4 or 5 cameras on the back of them. For those of you that don't know, the cameras on the back of the phone today are typically a macro lens, which allows you to take up really up close shots very well, a primary normal lens, and then a telephoto lens, which lets you take pictures from farther away that you can zoom in on. So for example, on the iPhone, you'll see a 0.5, a 1, and a 3. And that's switching between the lenses of 0.5 is really close, up close, zoomed in, and 3 is you can zoom way in from far away. So if you're taking a shot of a building, you can zoom in on a portion of that building really close. So updating your smartphone is the first step. If you haven't updated your smartphone in a couple years at least, it's time to do that. You'll be amazed at the progress that they continue to make with the lenses that they're putting into smartphones. The second tip is to look for the light. And this is something that messes people up in so many different ways with their photography and even in their Zoom calls. They don't realize and understand the value and the power of where the light's coming from. So I'll show you a video of this actually doing this outside here in just a second, but if you have a shot where the sun's right in the shot, it's going to wash out the photo that you're taking. It's going to overexpose the photo that you're taking. Sure, our cameras do a lot better now to compensate for that, but you're going to have it'll be a much better photo if you have positioned yourself properly. I don't know if you've seen this in a Zoom call, but sometimes people have a window right behind them in their Zoom call at their home office or something, and the sun is streaming in that window, and all you see is this dark outline of the person on the call. That's the power of light. It will wash things out. So you want to make sure that the light is hitting your face and not the back of your head. That's the simple rule. And right now I'm going to show you an example of that outside. So in this example, I'm going to show you about looking for the light. So if I take a photo of a selfie and I've got the sun behind me and I take that shot, this is what I get. It's terrible. Versus if I simply turn a little bit, if I start turning so that the sun, it's so bright, but you sure can see, you can see somebody's face so much better when you get that kind of perspective. You can even touch up that shadowy side. So I'll do my law of thirds and I'll get this shot of my face with the sun lighting my face versus shooting into the sun, because when you shoot into the sun, it totally blows out your photo and looks awful. The next tip is about exposure and focus, and I know that can be a groaner for people because for camera people, they can get very technical and geek out on the whole exposure focus thing. And our smartphones, you can get advanced applications that give you so much granular control over exposure and focus. But what you really need to know in the real world is that when you expose the photo properly and you focus on the subject of your photo properly, it's just a lot crisper and you can see more detail. That's the simple answer, when you get the focus and the exposure set properly. So the simple trick I'm going to show you is that you can actually put your finger on your iPhone screen as you're taking a photo to lock the exposure and the focus on the subject that you're trying to take. And I'll show you how to do that right now. So talking about exposure and focus, these cameras do a really good job of exposure and focus by default. But one thing you can do to lock in the location of what you want to be focusing and exposing properly in your photo, let's say that I'm going to shoot this tree here to the left that I've got in the lower left rule of thirds. If I hold my finger on the tree trunk there, it will lock the exposure and focus to that part of the tree, and then I take my photo. And you're gonna get the best exposure and focus on your subject when you do something like that. So there's lots of different, like say it was this light pole, you'd hold your finger on the light pole, and it's actually gonna change how the exposure was done. It's hard to see in this example, but especially in low light conditions, when you set your exposure and focus on the subject you're trying to take, it will make subtle adjustments in the camera to do a better job for you. So you might have been hearing me talk about grids and law of thirds in some of these examples and demos that I've been doing. The idea of the law of thirds is that you break up the screen, basically the composition of the photo that you're taking, into 9 blocks. And so there's 3 rows and 3 columns of blocks. And what you're trying to do is put the subject of the photo that you're taking into one of the specific grid areas instead of just centering your composition on the subject that you're taking. And I'll show you an example. It's hard to describe all that. So I'll just show you an example of what the law of thirds does for you and the before and after and how much better of a photo it can make. It'll make your photo much more interesting. I'll show you that right now. To turn on grid lines for your camera in your phone, I'm going to show you how to do this on an iPhone. Go into Settings and scroll down to Camera. It's a little bit down. You'll have to go for a little bit. And then there's Camera. Boom. And there's this grid section. That's all you have to do is turn that on. Instead of having that off, turn that on. And once you do that, when you go back over to your camera application and pull that thing up, not productivity, camera, boom, you will now have your grid lines. So a lot of times what people will do is they'll get their subject, you know, they'll get their subject right in the middle of the frame. So let's say this tree is what I'm wanting to take a photo of. Boom, take the photo. Great. You might step back because you want to get the whole tree centered photo. Great. But how much more interesting would it have been if you put this on one of the thirds? So typically what you'll see in marketing photos and things like that is they will get so now you can see that the tree trunk is on that lower left hash mark so that you're getting the sky, 2/3 of the sky, the tree and all that stuff, boom. And I'll show you the difference between this photo that's centered and the photo that's using the law of thirds. And the last tip I have for you is kind of a conversation around should you be taking photos horizontally or vertically. And I say that because a lot of times, because you're typically holding your phone upright like this, right? You're typically holding your phone like this. And so people take their photos upright a lot. They forget the fact that, oh my gosh, I'm holding my phone upright. And that's great for TikTok and certain social media sites that want the image to be vertical like that. But for a blog post or an image on your website or lots of LinkedIn posts, anything like that, it's a lot easier to use a landscape photo, a wide photo, instead of a tall photo. So those are 5 tips that if you make them a habit, you will have better photos when you're using your smartphone to take shots. And I'll run through the list really quickly again. Make sure you have a current smartphone because the lenses are just so much better. Make sure you're looking for the light. It needs to be behind you, not in front of you. And in other words, don't focus the camera on the sun. Make sure the sun is off to the side or behind you when you're taking your shots. Make sure you expose the photo properly by holding your finger on the screen of your phone to lock the exposure and the focus if you're wanting to get a really perfect shot. Turn on the grid lines so that you can use the law of thirds to line up your photo in the right sections of the frame. And make sure you're thinking, should you be taking horizontal versus vertical photos? And my recommendation is most of the time you should be taking them landscape or horizontal, the wide version of photos. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you're having a great week. I put this content out every single week, so if you would do me a favor and subscribe to my channel on YouTube if you haven't already, or throw me a like or a comment, I'd really appreciate that. I'll see you next week.